Hello. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. Last lesson we were talking about comparing and ordering integers. So you had a list of integers like -9, +3, -6, and 0. And they may have asked you to put them in order, whether from least to greatest or greatest to least. In this case, if I wanted to order these from least to greatest, it would be -9, then -6, then 0, then +3. Those are when we're comparing and ordering integers that are whole numbers. Now, we're going to start talking about when they look like decimals and when they look like fractions. So, fractions and decimals can be negative. So, if I were to say 1/2 or 0.5, which those are equivalent, they could also be -0.5 or -1/2. What are some examples of real-life situations that involve negative fractions or decimals? So, when we talked about going up the mountain, and we talked about going up a number of feet, well, you don't take giant steps and it's 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. You might go half of a foot. Or going under the ocean. You don't swim exactly like 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet. You actually make your way down the number line and you would be in a fractional piece. Also, money. This could be like you owe 50 cents. Or you have to pay back half the bill, something like that. And this kind of goes back to all of our situations we talked about earlier with positive and negative numbers. If you have two negative numbers, the one that is closest to 0 is greater or bigger. Now remember, that's if both of these numbers are negative. So like in this case, -9 and -6, which of these two numbers is the bigger one? Well, -6 is closer to 0. Ergo, this is a greater number. On the number line below, we're going to fill in the missing points. So if this is 0, this is +1, this is -1. This is about halfway. This would be +1/2 or +0.5. And these opposites would be down here. That would mean those are -1/2 or -0.05, like I mentioned earlier. All right. We're going to fill in the number line below using decimals, and then we're going to use this number line to compare these numbers. So, let's get started. Here's 0. Here's 1, and its opposite, -1. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 indicators leading up to +1. So that means this would be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and so on. Now the reason I'm kind of writing them sideways, is so that way that they don't take up too much space. And if I were to count the same way but in the opposite direction, that would mean this is -0.1, -0.2, -0.3, and so on. Give you guys a chance, if you need to pause the video to write these down, you can. I have to remind myself that when I'm adding the negative sign and negative numbers, it takes up a little more space than if I just wrote the positive sign, because I don't have to put the sign for those numbers. Now, let's take a look. -0.2 and -0.3. So I'm going to look. Oh, I have my arrows from last time. So I have 0.3 and 0.2. Which of these numbers is closer to 0? -0.2. Ergo, that one is greater. Nice. Now I'm going to have -0.1, -0.9. Well, now, going off of what I just mentioned before, the number if they're both negative, and they are, the number closest to 0 is bigger. Ergo, this number is greater, since it is closer to 0. Now I'm going to look right here. -0.8 and +0.8. Well, this one is positive, ergo, that one is greater. It is bigger. -0.25, -0.75. Think of it this way. These are good indicators of money. So, would I rather have to pay somebody back 25 cents Or I got to pay somebody 75 cents more money. I have to pay them back. Negative 0.5, or excuse me, negative 0.25 is closer to 0. That is greater. Now I have negative 0.5 compared to 0. Well, 0 is here. Negative 0.5 is there. This one is further to the right. It is greater. Okay, now we're getting even more fractional. So let's think. Negative 0.02, that would be somewhere in here. And negative 0.01 would be somewhere right there. That one is actually bigger. It would be closer to 0. When comparing two negative decimals or fractions, you need to find the absolute value of each. Remember, absolute value had these symbols, like -1. The two long symbols, kind of like parentheses. The larger the absolute value, the smaller the number is. Now remember, it's when they're both negative. So it's like it's asking about its opposites. So both the numbers are negative. Let's go back to these two. Both these numbers are negative. If I find the absolute value, which I will, I have negative 0.02, negative 0.01. The absolute value, I'm going to zoom in. The absolute value of this would be 0.01. The absolute value of this would be 0.02. I'm going to go back and read the direction. It says, if I found the absolute value, the larger the absolute value, the smaller the number. This has a larger absolute value, which means this number is further left on the number line. It's actually a smaller number. So let's take a look. Comparing these numbers. Well, 2.3 is way closer to 0 than 4.52. That one is bigger. Negative 5.5 versus negative 6 2/3. Well, I can just look at the whole numbers. Negative 5 is going to be closer than negative 6. That's one strategy. Just take a look at the whole number. And now I have these other fractional pieces. I would recommend, for situations like this, to find the common denominator. So if I multiplied 4/5 times 8 and 7/8 times 5, the new fraction would be 32 over 40, negative 32 over 40 versus negative 35 over 40. Try and make that a more negative. Looks like a long fraction. I should have written like up here. Negative 32 over 40 is going to be closer to 0 than negative 35 over 40. So this one is bigger. All right, guys. I'm going to have you flip your papers over to the back. You are going to need to compare using greater than, less than, or equal to. I recommend 3 things. Number lines, absolute value, and last but not least, GCF, and making a common denominator for fractions, because that will help more easily to compare them. All right. Once you finish this, you can move on to group work. You may get started.